You're listening to the Sketchnote Army podcast. I'm your host, Mike Rohde, the author of the Sketchnote Handbook and the Sketchnote Workbook. And this is the podcast where I chat with sketchnoters and visual thinkers and try to understand what makes them tick. Hey, are you looking for the ideal sketchbook for your sketchnoting practice? The Sketchnote Idea Book is the sketchbook designed for sketchnoters. Equipped with no bleed, no show-through paper, you can take almost any marker or pen you can throw at it. Get 10% off with code ARMY at airship.store. Hey everyone, it's Mike here, and I'm here with my friend, Dr. Bryan Vartabedian. Dr. Vartabedian, it's so good to have you on the show.
It's great to be here. I think we've been planning this for a number of years, and it never really happened, right?
Yeah, well, we're both pretty busy people.
Right.
You being a physician in leadership certainly demands your time for very important things, probably more important than Sketchnote podcasts many times. But sooner or later we figured we'd catch you, and it's worked out. So I'm really happy to have you here.
Great to be here.
So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Oh, I am by training, I'm a pediatric gastroenterologist. Spent most of my career as a full-time clinician. Over the past couple of years, I've gotten into medical leadership, and I helped Texas Children's here in Houston build a couple of their community hospitals, and they recruited me to open our new Austin flagship hospital in Northwest Austin. So I'm merging into medical leadership, and it's been kind of fun, a little different.
Cool. And I know that Austin is growing leaps and bounds, so I imagine the demand in Austin for those services has got to be pretty significant. Yeah. I would imagine.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
good.
Big tech explosion going on there. And so a lot of demand for pediatric services. And so we're also offering women's services there too. So high risk kinds of women's services. So
wow.
It's gonna be a beautiful hospital up in Cedar Park in Northwest Austin, if anyone listening wants to come out and see it.
I think, I don't know that I've been in that region, but I've been to some other regions around Austin. So I'll have to look on a map when we're all done. So, so you've been doing that. I'm really curious now, so we talked a little bit, I warned you that we're going to do they call it the superhero origin story. Like, how did you get to the place where you are? We know where you are now, but how did you get here? And more importantly for this audience, how did visual thinking, using your whiteboard to explain very complex topics to patients, is what I remember we talked about in my book 10 years ago. How did you end up integrating that into your practice? Because it doesn't seem like that's something, I mean, the big joke is doctors' handwriting are impossible to read. And it sounds like your handwriting is quite legible. So how did you end up in that place? I'd love to hear that story. And,
Mike, it's a good question, because I think I have been using large whiteboards in my exam rooms, I guess now for over 20 years. And it started with these little whiteboards, these little tiny whiteboards that they used to have in exam rooms that would sort of tell the nurses, you've seen these in like hospital rooms.
Yeah.
The nurse's name, like who the assistant is, and whatever, what time the lunch trays are coming in or whatever. And so I used to try to I found myself sort of sketching pictures on these little tiny boards, and it was sort of unsatisfying because I was so constrained. And I think, and maybe it was around Y2K, I started, I had the manager invest in some larger boards and larger dry erase boards, which really expanded my ability to kind of develop a kind of an intentional use of graphics in the exam room with families. And I just sort of fell into it. And the real tipping point, around the time smartphones were kind of new, and I noticed mamas would hold their phones up and take pictures of what I had drawn. And it was kind of at that moment, and the remarks that I got from families about how images and even just bullet lists and arrows and things were so instrumental in helping them understand what was going on with their child. As you can understand, physiology, anatomy can be tricky to describe. A gallstone in a gallbladder, or a poop back up in the colon. when you make a picture of that, it really, really is a lot easier for someone to understand. Even beyond pictures, even just bullet lists, a bullet list with arrows, or two bullet lists with an arrow going between the two. Something as simple as that for a young mother with an 8-week-old child who's exhausted. If you try to explain some of this stuff without any supporting media to help them understand, even remember what the 5 things on the list are, it's impossible. So I don't even know how people practice medicine without this kind of visual aid.
I think back to when I've had x-rays done, you could show me the x-ray and you could explain to me how it works, but it still doesn't make sense to me because I'm not practiced in understanding how to interpret that. So you almost really need what you're talking about. And I'm looking at the sketchnote workbook sample that we have here. You're talking about a gastroparesis, likely, right? You were sort of drawing this symbol, and we'll put a link to this in the show notes so you can see what I'm talking about. You almost need, so there's the situation, and there's a conceptual component to it where you're explaining the concept of what's happening, why it's happening, and how we're going to address it in this simple way. Because even showing pictures like x-rays are not going to be helpful to, again, a mother who's tired and has this 8-week-old who's crying because they hurt,
Yeah, absolutely. And what's so interesting is that are you Wisconsin?
Yes. Yeah. You remembered. Yeah.
Yeah. So we use the biggest EHR program in I think in the world, called Epic. And they're out of Wisconsin. Yeah. A big Wisconsin company. And, I think our hospital paid $50 million to implement it. And it has some amazing abilities, but something very, very interesting, and it's funny, has happened. I'll go through a 30-minute consult with a child who's not growing or whatever, and I'll make a note, make my impression. Docs have a thing called the impression, which is what we think is going on, and that's often we refer to when we go back in the notes. What was I thinking back then? But I've had parents. I've gone through the chart. Patient comes back 2 months later. I look at my note. My note maybe isn't that great. Then the mom pulls out her phone and shows me the sketch note that I did on the board. And within 7 seconds, I can see everything that we discussed without even, more than 7 seconds. I can just tell. So it's so interesting that a visual can be a better way to document kind of what I was thinking and what I was doing, even more than $100 million software package.
Yeah. I think I've had this theory that it's something to do with the sort of the mapping, or the space, the use of space and the mapping ability of a visual. So you're not only working with words, but you're always putting them in context to each other. So there's more implied and even explicit relationships that you can draw because it's using the space, where typing in text sort of gets crunched into this text, even a list, right? It's got its limitations. So it'd be interesting to see if, does Epic allow you to upload your pictures? That might be an interesting way to solve that problem, right? While the mother is taking a picture, you are too, right?
So it does. It absolutely does. And I've yet to sort of pull the trigger on that. There is a very interesting thing that's kind of come up, which is, what about liability when I write on a whiteboard? Does that become part of subject to what's called legal discovery? Let's say I made a mistake with a diagnosis. Could a mama pull out my whiteboard picture and use that in a court of law? And probably, honestly, so it's probably the good, if our hospital attorneys are listening, they're like, you need to get those in the chart immediately. But I think it's always bothered me a little bit that I do these images, and they're honestly very powerful, but I think they do probably carry. I haven't gotten in trouble yet, but I do think they can and should be part of the medical record.
Yeah.
You're talking about, I don't know, giving context maybe to what we're discussing. One of the things that happens when I have these whiteboards, and once I launch into a discussion with a family, these visuals become sort of the center of the discussion, and it becomes really powerful with a family that doesn't speak English. If I have a migrant family that speaks Spanish, maybe not super educated, and I draw a simple picture of a stomach or a colon or a liver, with, with red hash marks to mean inflammation. It's almost universal. And we gather around the board. I've even had patients participate in the sketchnoting
I
to
wondered
sort of
about that.
add things that are missing. And especially it's really powerful with kids who are probably preteen and older, who can really kind of add to it or correct what I've put up in terms of symptoms and that sort of thing. But the point being that it kind of becomes this center. And even when I have a translator, the translators know me and they go to the board and they're pointing. And so it just all kind of works,
There's some collaborative nature to that. I know in the work that I do, when we collaborate on boards together, it's much richer than if it's just me preaching to the other people. I invite people to come up to the board, and it becomes much more valuable because then everybody's really adding to it and adding dimension, because you can't know or see every thing, right? You can't feel what the patient's feeling. So you have to rely on their ability to describe to you. And if they maybe they don't even think about it until they start writing, and that might reveal something they couldn't verbalize, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's the past 10, 15 years, we've been seeing this rise of participatory medicine where patients are more empowered with what, start with the web and all that. And it used to be the doctor was a priest and the priesthood and all that sort of thing. Now people are there's more participatory. And there's also, there's a movement called shared decision-making in medicine where patients participate in sort of deciding on the plan in a collaborative way. And when we put 4 or 5 options, listed 1 through 5 on the right side of the board, which is where I always put them, we can sort of negotiate that a little bit. And it just lends to weighing things when you can see them written down.
I would imagine too that the idea of a collaborative to whatever degree with the patient would also mean their buy-in to actually, so if there's a part that you do, and then there's a part that they have to do, medications, physical therapy, I don't know, variety of things that they are responsible for, that if they feel like they've had a hand in making that choice, they're going to be more likely to actually fulfill their part of it, which means a better outcome, right?
Yep. There's some evidence to support that, but I can just tell you, I see that firsthand. And yeah, for sure. Once they're involved in it, they definitely are more invested for sure.
Yeah, I know I am. I can only speak for me, I guess, but that's pretty cool.
But it's been very fun. It's been a fun journey, and it's kind of we've had interest from the docs at the Mayo Clinic have called me, and it's like, how do you do this? And I think we even kicked around maybe a decade ago. I thought I should make like a white paper to teach doctors how to do this, and I never did it. But something that's sort of akin to sketch notes for clinicians, because I think I do have a sort of a methodical way that I do it, a way that I use the geography of the board to optimize the space, and what do I use bullets for? Where do I put the plan, and so on and so forth.
Almost like a language.
But I thought of formalizing it, which I haven't yet, but I probably should.
I have some potential inspiration. My friend and colleague Rob DeMeo is a physicist. He started using it in his practice as a physicist and found it really valuable, even though he had to modify the way he did it. He wrote a paper that basically explains how he uses sketch notes in a scientific setting. It might be a really interesting reference to start from and see how he structured it, and then maybe produce something along the same lines. Could be interesting. So we'll put that in the show notes too, and I'll make sure you get that.
I don't just use visual thinking in the exam room. I, in the spirit of Austin Kleon, who's sort of a cartoonist here in Austin, Texas, I keep a journal, and I do a lot of my thinking and kind of visual thinking, not as beautiful as you do, but when I'm sorting through ideas, I use a lot of the sketch notes elements to sort of help me understand how I'm thinking about things, from basic, brainstorming to mind mapping to everything.
That's really great to hear. That's used privately as well in your
so
it's in your thinking.
Maybe that's how I started doing it in the exam room too, because this is kind of, I don't know, and you said this just a moment ago, I don't know what I think until I write it down sometimes. Like I can't tell I'll have an idea, but it's like until I put it into some sort of construct. There's also, different media stimulate me to be creative in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I do a lot of writing, and I type. I use an app called Ulysses. It's kind of like a writing
Use that too. Mm-hmm.
app, and but there are times when I'm stuck, and if I take to a white sheet of paper with your sketch notes, elements, or just let myself go free, things come out that would never come out on a keyboard.
Yeah, I have the same. I use the same tool, and I run into the same challenges when I do workshops. Sometimes I just need to take a notebook and go to the cafe and get a coffee and dump on the page, and they're not beautiful. Yeah. Right. But I get so much information. Then what I do is I'll take that more mapped visualization, then I'll come back and then I can write again. It sort of opens up the detail that I got stuck on when I'm trying to type. Like my typing fingers don't work as effectively as my visualization fingers, I guess. If that makes sense. Yeah. How did you end up? So when I look at the work that you do, it seems like you got quite good handle on visualization. Were you trained in any way? Did you just naturally do this? Did you draw when you were a little kid? Like where did these basic skills come from?
Yeah. I did a lot of art when I was very young. So it's interesting you should say that. I never thought about it, but I did. And honestly, with what I do on the whiteboard, and I have other images too, it's the elements of what I do are pretty simple. I mean, almost like what you outline. It's got, there isn't, and this is the reason why I think anyone can do this. Any doc can do this. And in a minute, I'll get into what some docs do and what they do wrong when they try to do this. But like writing, I think maybe in the book, there's a picture of an esophagus and a stomach, and the esophagus is two lines going down. The greater curvature of the stomach is a big curve, and the lesser curvature is a little curve, and anyone can do that. And then red hash marks are inflammation, universal sign, and a little round circle is an ulcer, and so I'm kind of a minimalist in terms of what I do on the whiteboard. I try to use basic elements. I try not to overdo it. I try to write it with the understanding that the mom is going to take a picture of it. And I want it to be clean enough and legible enough so that when she goes home to dad over dinner, she can point and she can do the teaching.
Yeah.
I've one of the mistakes I've seen is some of my colleagues start getting very, hypergraphic and hyperkinetic and very, very busy, which can be kind of natural for some people, but the end result can kind of be hampered, I think, on some level. So I try to keep it intentionally on the clean, maybe in the way that you would do a sketch note at a meeting.
Right? Yeah, and doing something clean and simple is actually harder than doing it messy, right? Because you don't have to really think about what when I say this thing, what is it conveying? Is it necessary? Those kind of questions you have to ask, right? So, and then I guess the other thing about leaving it open and clean is if you're doing this collaborative work. I'm looking at the sample here. You've got some stuff drawn in black, and then you've got a movement shape in green. It looks like it's moving out of the stomach. And then you have Prevacid as one of the choices versus Bentil. And you indicate that Prevacid in that context at 15 milligrams is better. And you use a red marker to sort of circle that. So you've got this language that it's really simple, but you're using this language to kind of annotate. And if you pack that full of stuff, you're not going to have any room to really do that annotation and still have it clean and understandable.
Yeah,
I would think.
Yeah, and I try not to overdo the colors either. I tend to stick to 2 or 3 typically, because it's really the colors aren't that important, but it can add an element that's helpful. It's funny, Mike. I sometimes tell my colleagues about this, and they say, "Oh, I do that, and I do it on the butcher paper on the exam room table." You've seen the doc sketch with the pen on the paper, which is it's kind of a primitive kind of sketch noting. But my problem with that is it's not intentional. It doesn't have. It's not intended to create a product at the end for the family. It's not. It tends to be scratched and scribbly. It's very hard to read, and I I think it's better than nothing, maybe. But again, I think of the whiteboard, or even if you don't have a whiteboard, you can take a large, oversized notebook and do that. If you're a doc listening, you can use a large, oversized notebook with a Sharpie or a nice 1 millimeter gel pen and get a good result.
Something that could be photographed. I can imagine some physicians might like to carry that book around with them, right, from room to room. Maybe they don't want to be leaving it on a board or erasing. That maybe carrying it's better for them. That could be.
I carried a whiteboard around with me in the hospital for a while. Believe it or not, yeah, it was sort of a trademark, but it became difficult because it was, you'd forget it half the time. So
yeah. This episode of the Sketchnote Army podcast is brought to you by Concepts, a perfect tool for sketchnoting, available on iOS, Windows, and Android. Concepts' infinite canvas lets you sketchnote in a defined area while still enjoying infinite space around it to write a quick note, scribble an idea, or keep pre-drawn visual elements handy for when you need them most. The infinite canvas lets you stretch out and work without worrying if you'll run out of space. And when combined with powerful vector drawing that offers high resolution output and complete brush and stroke control, you have a tool that's perfect for sketchnoting. Search Concepts in your favorite app store to give it a try. I know there's some startups that have happened. I don't know where they're at now, but there were these books that were whiteboard inside, but you'd fold it up and had a strap like a moleskin notebook. You could get them in different sizes. They get quite big. So you could literally carry it around, had a little clip for the marker, so you could pop it open and do like a whiteboard drawing on the spot. It was kind of a cool idea.
I've been tempted to, use Procreate or something to sort of do these visuals on a pad and then share digitally with a family. I just never quite get into that because I like the size and the grandeur of a large 5-foot whiteboard and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think probably there's something about the whiteboard and the simple tools that makes it more approachable if you do want to have family involvement. Like drawing on your iPad or drawing on your notepad might feel like they're invading, whereas a whiteboard feels more neutral or something.
Yep.
And it's more common. Like one of the things I discovered when I started teaching sketchnoting is I got fancy notebooks and pens and all this stuff. And I found out that actually it was really intimidating for students to work with these really fancy tools. So now when I do workshops, I just have them order a ream of paper and some Flair pens and we're good, right? It sort of drops the level of the tool to the point that it almost is forgettable, right? You leave behind the paper or the pen and like, I'll just get another one, right? It's so simple. So I imagine that's
Cleon jokes.
The same thing.
He's a cartoonist again. I'll bring him up, but he's always joking. People email him and ask him what pen he uses, as if they bought the same pen, they'd be just as talented, but it's really, and it drives him crazy because that's not the point, and everyone's got their own favorite gel pen or the whatever. So
you have to adapt it to your needs, right? That's part of the game. That's really interesting. So we sort of are stumbling into tools, so maybe we should just go there. But before we go there, I'd love to hear, like, is there something current that you're doing? So obviously you sound like you've moved to a new location. Are you thinking about how you might use visualization in this new position, or maybe start sharing these concepts with physicians? There's something new that you're doing that you might want to talk about?
Yeah.
Talk about?
Well, the first order of business is to get whiteboards in our new clinics in Austin. And so I've got that rolling. I have done workshops for my faculty locally here through the years, and they love that. And as I suggested, people, they kind of do this on their own, but they've never done it with that intentionality of using it to create a product. So I do want to pull it to Austin with me. I would love to. I need to create some collateral material that teach people how to do this on the web, kind of like you've done with workshops. And so I would love to do that, but we're building this $700 million hospital, and I got to hire 200 doctors and
a little time constrained, Brian.
Yeah, time constrained. So, but I still, my reputation precedes me because everyone else is like, you're gonna have the whiteboards. I'm like, oh yeah.
Maybe we should cook up some kind of a weekend workshop where we'll record it with you, and I'll be your
Oh, that'd be
host,
fun.
and you could just get your whiteboard out and show us your practice, and we'll record it, and then you can share it with all your whoever wants to learn your techniques. That'd be
You
fun.
know what's so interesting, Mike, is that since, one of the great things about the internet, not like the internet's new or something, but um, there emerged this population of physician artists, and there are, I can, point you to um, a bunch of illustrators and cartoonists who are, real professional cartoonists who are physicians who, obviously, with the emergence of the web, they became discoverable right before the web. No one, how
would you know? Yeah.
How would you know there's a guy like sketching? And so there's some real talent out there. And it's what's amazing. We think of docs as sort of these narrow people, but there's a whole population of docs doing very interesting things with illustration and with graphics and cartoons. And so it's kind of cool to sort of follow these people and see what they do.
And you're part of that community, in your own way, doing it.
It is, yeah, it is. It's. I'm. What I do is very practical. It's. I'm doing it for a purpose and for an endpoint. Well, I guess they are too, but it's very, it's very different.
Their purpose is different, right? It might be more like
Yes.
medical illustration, which I'm kind of aware of, right? We're explaining through medical illustration, which is a kind of a different, practice. But you do need that skill to understand, what something really is. If you misrepresent that could be pretty dangerous. So, well, it sounds like your tools are pretty simple. I'm guessing it's whiteboards. And do you have specific markers that you prefer to use? Is there a certain color, certain brand, any of that kind of thing that you could share?
We use Expo Low Odor.
Okay.
The odors of some of the whiteboards can be pretty strong, and for kids with reactive airway disease and other airway problems, it can be an issue. So we try to use the low odor. In my personal work, I have a thing for fountain pens, and so I use a nice heavy grade notebook with wide nib pens, and so I enjoy doing that. They require a little maintenance. Beyond that, I do a 1 millimeter Signio Uniball, which this is my favorite gel.
Nice broad tip. I like the 1 millimeters as well. Kind of juicy. I say juicy. I like it juicy. So
kind of slippery and all that sort of thing. So
yeah, exactly.
And I'll even practice on a notebook. Sometimes I'll be stuck in an exam room trying to figure out how do I express a concept of gallbladder motility, maybe, and I'll just take out a sheet in my notebook and just start scribbling and come up with some real simple representations, and that's how I come up with what I use.
That's how you build sort of your library, at the visual library that you use, right?
Yeah, I use probably 10 or 20 of the same kind of images suited to what's going on with the kid, but and you mix and match them, but
that's a very simple tool set. And I neglected to ask this. So how do the kids react when they see this? Does that change your relationship with them? Do they feel more like they can enter the discussion when they see this kind of work?
Yeah, certainly for the teenagers, they definitely participate sort of on that intellectual level. What's so interesting is with a 4-year-old who may not be engaged in the conversation that I'm having with the mama. When I go to the board, they light up and they see the colors. Oftentimes I'll give them a marker and let them go to the lower part of the board and goof off and make. I've had kids try to copy what I'm doing, so it's kind of fun and cute. But yeah, they do. Kids are very drawn to pictures, and so one of the funny things I'll do if I have a reluctant 3-year-old, it works great with 3-year-olds who doesn't want to be examined. I'll have mom pull up their shirt and I'll say, that whiteboard so that I can draw a picture of your belly button. So I look at their belly button like I'm studying it, and they'll make sort of a swirly figure on the board, and they just go nuts and they love it. And you get immediate buy-in because they see the thing and they look at their belly button and they say, "That looks like my belly button." So
that could be a good trick for other visual thinkers who need to get the attention of little kids.
Right. So it's kind of fun. I use it in a lot of different elements. So
So this is a point in the podcast where we typically will do tips. I like to frame it that imagine someone's listening, they're in visual thinking, whatever that means to them, and maybe they've hit a plateau or they just need a little inspiration. What would be 3 things you might encourage someone to do to help them break out of that rut or just to have a little inspiration?
Yeah, I think that we talked about docs writing on butcher paper. I might challenge people to sort of take it up a notch. Obviously, putting up a whiteboard is sort of a little bit of a challenge for a lot of people in clinics and wall space and that sort of thing. So again, a large pad can do the trick, and maybe take that step to try to be more intentional with the educational material you're using. And you got to kind of just jump in and try. So I would say, be intentional. That may be one tip. The second tip might be look for a role model. You can look at the pictures that were in sketchnotes, and I think I've got some online. I need an Instagram page is what I need. But there are, you can look up medical sketchnotes. Some of my blog posts I put on there, and I just get a role model and see how people do it and what they do. And that's another thing to kind of get you unstuck. You wanted 3, right?
If you got them, 3 would be great.
So, yeah, keep it simple. Keep it clean, and I think that I'm a minimalist, and I think families, again, you want to think about what you're creating for families when they go away, and have fun with it. To me, I've had more fun in medicine doing this than anything else. It's been a little bit of a side gig for me, and it's also great for families and makes it more enjoyable for me.
That's fun, and it serves a purpose, and it communicates. So yeah, and in the best case scenarios, it integrates the patients with you, which means better outcomes, which everybody's driving for, right?
Absolutely. We need to. That's the golden ring, is to try to connect whiteboards with disease outcomes, which I think if I had the right study design and the right person helping me coordinate it, I think we could do it. But so that might be a great project to aspire to.
That's the next thing after you get this Austin clinic all set up and rolling.
Yeah, I come down and visit. We'll give you a tour.
Yeah, maybe I can do a little teaching. I can teach some basics, and
yeah, we could do a live podcast from one of the exam rooms.
There we go. That sounds good. I will take you up on that. Austin's one of my favorite cities, so wouldn't be hard to convince me to come. Probably in the springtime.
We'll get some barbecue.
Probably in the springtime.
Yeah.
Well, Bryan, this has been really great to have you on the show. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and sort of the way you approach things. Of course, we're going to find a variety of things. I've got some things up here I can share in the show notes, but I would love to hear, where are the places that you hang out most? Do you have social media that you hang out? It looks like 33charts.com is your site and your blog. Are there any other places we should go to?
So I have a newsletter at 33charts.substack.com. So it's the 33 Charts Substack.
Great.
So I write a lot about not a lot on visual thinking, which I should do, but a lot on technology and medicine and change and humans and how humans use technology. But you can find me there, 33 Charts. I occasionally post there. People can reach out to me. You can find my contact, I think, on my
right on website. That site, yeah, on the site or on the Substack. Shoot, great. Well, thanks for making
It's been
time.
Great. Yeah, it's been great finally meeting you.
Yeah, same here, and I wish you the best in your next venture. And for everyone listening, it's another episode of the Sketchnote Army podcast in the can. So until next time, we'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
The Sketchnote Army podcast was created by me, Mike Rohde, and brought to you by Rohdesign Studios. It's produced and edited by Alec Polianis of Amp Creative Studios. The theme music was created by John Schiedermeyer. To support the creation of this show, I invite you to buy one of my books, the Sketchnote Handbook or the Sketchnote Workbook. You can find the books on Amazon or go to peachpit.com and use the code ROHDE40 for 40% off. Please share this podcast with other visual thinking friends, and be sure to leave a nice rating on iTunes or your favorite podcast listening app so others can find the show.